Welcome to Sci-Fi-preneurship, an All Journals podcast series that takes a look at how science fiction inspires people to envision the future and then create it. And this is part 2 of our episode about the works of Ursula K. Le Guin.
Last week, we talked to Veronica, Emily, and Sophia. And today, we're going to talk to
Dr. Christine Corbett Moran. Dr. Moran, been on the series before. She's a cybersecurity engineer at NASA's Jet Propulsion Lab. It's so cool.
Which is still so cool.
Oh.
Every time.
And Dr. Dan Novy, who's through the magic of time travel, he did actually go and get his PhD after we recorded his interview. Dr. Novy works at the MIT Media Lab, where he created a class called Sci-Fi to Sci-Fab.
But first, here's Christine. What's your Ursula K. Le Guin story? When did you first start reading her work?
How I got into science fiction, I realized I hadn't read a lot of the classics of sci-fi and that these were influencing the language and the actions and conversation of the people around me at MIT and in technology. So I read a lot of the things that, just asking people, what should I read, or reading off of lists. And Ursula K. Le Guin made it to some of those lists, didn't make it to all of those lists. A lot of the people I was talking to were either white men or influenced by white men. And at a certain point, after about a year or two of this, I realized, hey, I'm not reading as many women or people of color or people from underrepresented backgrounds. Technology impacts everyone. And I'm reading biased vision of the future, and I don't want my vision of the future, positive or negative, to be shaped by just an elite class. So I started digging a lot deeper, who are authors that I should be reading. And Ursula K. Le Guin was on my list, but didn't really make it until I was a little bit older. And I read, I think The Left Hand of Darkness was the first book I read of hers, and was really blown away by the narrative structure, a lot different and more experimental. Not necessarily the straightforward, like in every chapter in this specific way. And also the more intimate nature of the conversation, more philosophical. And certainly the storyline gripped me, and it was more similar to the classic literature that I had read. Some sci-fi cuts corners in the face of good ideas, doesn't necessarily have as lyrical prose, but Ursula K. Le Guin had that mix of the lyrical prose and the interesting ideas that I was like, I have to read more of this.
How I see Ursula K. Le Guin is as an inspiration is more on from a societal perspective to really help expand visions on what society could be outside of just the world that we occupy. And I think The Left Hand of Darkness really brought that to being with regards to gender.
Yeah, I mean, definitely this notion from The Left Hand of Darkness that you can change your gender, that a portion of your existence is just gender is utterly irrelevant, sexuality is utterly irrelevant, but without saying that sexuality is completely irrelevant for your entire life, sort of this compartmentalized relevance of sexuality and also the element of choice in that sexuality. I think society is still striving to that. It's something that our bodies are less equipped. I remember The Left Hand of Darkness came up a lot when I was pregnant, and I was thinking, this would be great if for the next baby, this could be my husband.
He didn't have to go through all that altering stuff. He could be sick.
There's a lot of our biology that currently isn't under our control, but there's a lot that could be with our ingenuity. And we see people being able to say, a lot of these things are choices. They're not ingrained by biology, or the opposite. They're ingrained by biology. And here I can, with a small amount of technology, get to the point where getting everything in sync. My mental state is I'm a woman. My biological equipment is slightly different. Let me get those two in sync. And I was born this way, and let me synchronize my entire body the way that it should be. And I'm hoping that with technology, it will get to the point where 200 years from now, my husband, life extension, imagine we're still around, would be able to say, okay, it's my turn to be pregnant now. And that if people want to turn off elements of their sexuality for a portion, they're able to. If they want to, change genders do that at will day to day. I would love to occasionally, interact with the world as a white man, not
me
because
too.
I'm transgender, but more because I feel like being able to choose our own avatars then breaks down the idea that one particular avatar has advantages or disadvantages.
Yeah. Let's talk about the ones who walk away from Omelas. How did you find that story?
Actually, I started taking writing classes while I was living at the South Pole. I really saw how much science fiction had shaped my vision of the future and some of my actions, and thought some of the meaning that I could bring to my life and my ideas would be to represent them in science fiction stories. And so try to do some writing myself and realized I was a terrible writer. So at some point, it dawned on me that you could take classes in this. So I started taking some online classes. And one of the assigned readings was this short story by Ursula K, which if you're listening, I recommend you pause the podcast right now and go read it. I think it might be 5 or 10 pages. It has some twists and deep thoughts in there, and it's worth just reading that before hearing us discussing it. But the punchline at the end is basically there's an entire utopia built upon the suffering of a small subset of people. And it's been a while since I read the story, but I think it's actually like one child. One person. Yeah, a child.
Even worse,
And at some point, everyone in the society or portion of the society is allowed to recognize this fact. And the question is, what do you do with that fact? Do you then go about your daily life? Well, most people do. And they have a great daily life, and that's just what they do. And there's this one child suffering, and that's all right. And some people choose to just, instead of going about their daily life and being delighted they live in a utopia, to conscientiously object in the way that they can and just walk away into the sunset and disappear. If they don't have the power to save this child, at least they could object to the fact that this whole society is built upon that suffering. It's intense, an intense question.
Yeah, and it's really short. And she's just like setting the stage for this utopia and like, throw in what you want. Like, what's your utopia? Just think about it. And then she brings you to this moment of, okay, there's this child in this room and it's just terrible. And it never sees light. It thinks like the mops are ghosts. It's scared of everything. And people just come and view it. And some people are like, well, but my life's great. And other people just like, I can't functionally live in a place where I know that it's on the back of suffering of even if it's just one person. And it's that question all around the greater good. And is it okay to take one life to save millions? And these are really deep questions that I still don't know the answer to. And depends on when you ask. There's some times where I would be like, yes, I'm going to walk away. But then other times, well, a lot of the world we live in today, we're complicit on what we can't change. And so that's always been a difficult question for me, and I oscillate.
I certainly think of the story every time I go to San Francisco or interact with the homeless population, whether it's here in LA, San Francisco, or elsewhere, in that San Francisco, in some sense, is like, here we have this glittering technological future that is being created, and people like to think that they're visionaries and forces for the greater good, but it is built upon the backs of literally that success, and that attempts at utopia building are causing housing crisis and inflation of prices in the area. And it's built in some sense upon the backs of the suffering of human beings. And I think no matter what, all the time, everyone is walking away, and all the time we're all, also staying in wherever you are in society. Like the story is a very simplified scenario, but in portions of my life, I'm distinctly and conscientiously objecting and deciding not to live in this utopian society, but instead deprive myself of that, to say, I'm not going to do this because it's on the suffering of others. And then in other portions, I'm choosing to live in that society. So I think it's something where like we cannot completely walk away, because you can't live completely off grid without any benefits of modern society. I mean, maybe slightly possible, but if you look at, there's videos of what it would take to make a toaster, or what it would take to make a pencil, or, kind of these small modern conveniences. And it really takes, the backbreaking labor of a whole society to create even the smallest things. So no matter what, you are complicit in some small things. So I just view it as a case-by-case basis. So, for example, I'm a vegan, so I don't eat any animal products, and I feel like I'm trying to walk away from the suffering and the horrible nature of our modern meat consumption. But there's plenty of other places in my life where, in terms of my impact on the environment, yeah, being a vegan is great, but traveling has a huge impact. And I'm not walking away from that. I'm getting on flights and flying around the globe, and global warming is going to bring huge suffering to people and has already. And so there's elements of my life where I'm walking away and elements where I'm staying. And I have to recognize that it's a scenario that extends not just to one portion of your life, but to every facet of your life.
Yeah, absolutely.
I guess my final thought is that I do think talking about language and it shaping our ideas in terms of story by story, some of the stories in sci-fi have those themes, but I think sci-fi as a whole does that, in that what we write about and read about does shape our culture and our technology. And so also in terms of the sci-fi that you choose to read and educate yourself or write yourself, that can have huge implications, maybe even more implications than working on and inventing a new technology, is describing what that technology would do if it were invented. And so science fiction is an extremely powerful form of literature because of that. So it's really neat to talk about it, exactly how sci-fi is going about that.
Thanks again to Christine. Now we're going to bring back Dan Novy, who works at the MIT Media Lab. He's been in a few other episodes in the series, and we welcome him back today.
Tell me about when you first read Ursula K. Le Guin, and what was some of the things that resonated with you?
So I first read Ursula K. Le Guin in, of course, the Earthsea trilogy. So coming up as a D&D player, you definitely get Lord of the Rings, you get Narnia, and then you wander into Ursula K. Le Guin. And for me, Le Guin, as I get older, becomes more and more and more interesting. And that's because she, much like Herbert, set aside certain tropes of science fiction and can be considered to be a little-known genre of social science fiction. So, you have the humanities, you have anthropology, you have social science. You can make science fiction out of those because they are sciences as well. And I think as I grow older and hopefully more mature, I don't know, the ideas that she talks about. I mean, I think if someone asked me right now, what is your favorite science fiction work of all time, I would really have to, at this point, say it's Those Who Walk Away from Omelas. It is the story that I send to friends when they're moving to San Francisco. And I say, okay, yes, you're going to go work for a big tech company. You're going to have this sort of wonderful experience of San Francisco, but I want you to read this story and I want you to really deeply think about who's paying the price for that. And just this idea of we can try to create utopians, but is it zero sum or not? Is there going to be a loser for this? And if we continually hide the bill of what this utopian society actually, costs, then I think that's something that we deeply, deeply need to talk about.
Of her stories, is there a character that you really identify with?
I don't identify specifically with one particular character. I'm more watching it like an ensemble cast. It's more of like a puzzle box, all operating together. And then I'm getting things out of it as they happen, bits of surprise and delight and worry. But there's not, say, a particular character that I would say, this is the character I identify with. And I think that's on purpose. I think it being the feminist science fiction, it's not necessarily written for me. And then there's a lot of argument. I mean, some feminists say, yes, she's feminist science fiction. Others say, no, she's not. She wrote in a standard sort of tropes with, male heroes and male pronouns. And if it was really, feminist, they wouldn't, especially when you're dealing with things like Left Hand of Darkness and, where you have, fluid, you're ambisexual, for most of the month. That should have been a little bit more explored. But for me, I think it's important that I don't identify necessarily with one particular character, especially in a work like Left Hand of Darkness. I think she's making it difficult for you to identify with a particular character. And when you do, when you find yourself, you really ask yourself, why? Why at this point in the story am I suddenly identifying with this character?
Yeah, for me, Ursula K. Le Guin really feels like we're, testing out different cultures. And if you look at a book like The Dispossessed, you've got your anarchists, but then you have your more traditional capitalistic type of society. And then you're exploring individualism and collectivism. She really takes a lot of these ideas and lets you try them on.
Yeah, I think for me, there were certain points where I was identifying with certain cultures. So like in the dispossessed. This idea is the anarcho, commune, like something that having lived in homes with warehouse mates, having tiny little versions of that where everyone definitely has to pull their weight. Everything is shared labor, and that can go well or it cannot go well. And luckily for me, it has gone well. And so in a way, I found myself identifying with ideas of culture, and certainly recognizing the culture that he ends up on, on the other planet, and like going, oh, that's the culture that's technically being critiqued, and that's my culture, so I recognize it, but deeply having a deep affinity for the anarcho-syndicate commune culture as well.
Is there anything with regards to culture from Ursula K. Le Guin, Dan, that has brought you to where you are today and has influenced the work that you do?
I think the idea that social sciences can be science fiction for me, as mentioned before, is a big idea. I think Sophia, when you talk to her, has this saying that I took to heart, that science fiction may be the only ethics class an engineer ever takes. And for me, when she said that to me, it just struck me to the bone, and it has stuck with me. And in a way, Le Guin, I think, would agree with that. So anytime I'm setting out to build something new, I will think about the ethical implications of it from the beginning. And if it turns out that it indeed is something we should not build, then we will not build that. But if it is something that desperately needs to be built or could be built, but we can build these safeguards or cultural norms into the technology from the very beginning. So rather than trying to graft them on afterwards as an afterthought, when the genie is already out of the bottle, which never works, you can build these ethical safeguards and ideas, whether that's hardware, software, wetware, cultureware, whatever, into the use and production of these kind of science fiction prototypes. I get that directly from Le Guin.
Phil, have you figured out the mystery behind the ones who walk away from Omelas?
This blew my mind when I read it in high school. I don't know if you want to spoil it, though. We've been spoiling everything else.
Well, it probably already got spoiled.
I feel like most of the things we talk about are like well-read enough where we don't mind spoiling them. But
yeah, I feel like maybe every episode we should say spoiler alert.
Oh. And you're spoiling things that are
long enough where
several decades. I think it's okay.
Yeah, it's okay. Anyway, Phil, your solution to the ones who walk away from Omelas?
All right, but I do have a solution. What I'm going to ask people to do is to go and read it. And then when your mind is blown and you're not sure whether it's a utopia or a dystopia or whatever, write into hello@all-turtles.com, and we'll put the right answer in a future podcast.
Ooh, Phil's baiting you. Is there a quote that resonated with you?
Yeah, and this is from The Dispossessed. Change is freedom. Change is life. It's always easier not to think for oneself. Find a nice, safe hierarchy and settle in. Don't make changes. Don't risk disapproval. Don't upset your syndics. It's always easiest to let yourself be governed. There's a point around age 20 when you have to choose whether to be like everyone else for the rest of your life or to make a virtue of your peculiarities. Those who build walls are their own prisoners. I'm going to fulfill my proper function in the social organism. I'm going to go unbuild walls. This podcast is a production of the All Turtles Galactic Media Empire. We recorded this episode in the world-class Donatello studios on the planet Gethin, which is actually really hard to get to because you can't fly there. Thanks again to Dr. Christine Corbett Moran and Dan Novy for joining us this episode. If you have any questions, comments, or suggestions for future episodes, send us an email to hello@all-turtles.com. Marie reads every message. Thanks again to everyone who made this episode possible, including Jem Metzendorf for editing, Marie McCoy-Thompson for producing, Chris Ploeg for his audio expertise, Ali Packard for our artwork, and Matt Ammerman for our theme music. On behalf of Brittney Gallagher and yours truly, Phil Libin, and the rest of the All Turtles team, thanks for listening.